police officers of Reddit, what are some laws that you feel uncomfortable enforcing because you disagree with them? It's not a specified law as such, but in the UK, people can use reasonable force to protect themselves, others, and property, etc. Obviously, everyone has their own interpretation of what reasonable force is. But I remember going to one job where a bloke was sat on his couch with a beer watching TV when a drunk bloke had just walked straight into his living room via the front door. A confrontation ensued and the drunk trespasser had become aggressive and a fight ensued. Long story short, the trespasser was given a proper shoe-in, so much so he's ended up in the street where he has then called the police. We attended and his injuries were substantial enough that the house occupant was arrested for grievous bodily harm. And it definitely rubbed me the wrong way being involved in that job because I totally sympathized with the guy and felt any of us would have probably done the same thing in his position. I take up issue with the whole phrasing of reasonable force too, because yeah, it's going to be subjective. Not everyone is going to agree what a reasonable force is. And it's just going to create awkward and sometimes just straight up bad situations like in the story. Story 2. Back in my LEO career days, I was always very uncomfortable with using dogs to search for drugs. Yeah, they really can sniff out drugs, but the false positive accuracy is so far out of whack with what should be a legal standard for reasonable suspicion that it's a little better than guessing. If a dog hits on 100 cars and 50% of them have no drugs in them, you just violated the civil rights of 50 people based on what a dog said. Dogs aren't people. You can't interview or cross-examine them in court. Story 3. I'm not a cop anymore, but I rarely arrested for personal use marijuana. It's a harmless plant. Selling is a different story, because most of those dealers are supporting a cartel or a higher crime, and I don't agree with that. There was one case where a bunch of guys in my agency would have arrested in a heartbeat, and honestly, by law, I was required to investigate, but didn't. A car drove through the back of someone's house because the driver confused the brake and gas pedal. The house that was driven through had a lone marijuana plant in another room, which is a felony in my state, and growers get crapped on in my state. I stepped in front of it so the firefighters and others wouldn't notice and raise hell about it. The homeowner was a good old boy, and a church-going father who worked a nice job and contributed greatly to society. I'm not trying to ruin his family's life over a plant. When I walked out of the house and came back in, the plant was missing. He was probably crapping bricks the whole time I stood there. Now that I'm not a cop, I thought about leaving a letter in his mailbox telling him I knew about it, but I don't want to make him paranoid. Yeah, OP, do not, under no circumstances, do you leave a letter in his mailbox. That reads 100% like a threat. You did a good thing here, just rest with that. Story 4. In my college town, there were really only 4 bars within walking distance to campus, and they were all notoriously lax on their ID policy. Any fake got you in the door, and sometimes didn't even need that. But the cops always kept their distance, because that meant students were drinking under the regulation of bouncers and bartenders, which was obviously preferable to the alternative of constantly throwing house parties. Story 5. Not a police officer, but still technically law enforcement at the time. When I was in the Coast Guard, I did a lot of drug and migrant interdiction down in the Caribbean. Chasing drug smugglers was pretty fun, but interdicting the migrants was always sad. We would always find Haitians or Cubans, and the Haitians were always much worse off. It was pretty heartbreaking having to send them back after seeing the state they were in, and the state of the country they were trying to leave. They would go through such great lengths to leave, and we had to stop them. One guy tried to light himself on fire, and others would try and injure themselves to try and get us to take them to US healthcare facilities. The only redeeming thing about interdicting them was their ships were always very shoddily made. And oftentimes our act of interdicting them was also a saving them from a sinking ship. Story 6. Not an officer, but criminal defense attorney. Driving while license revoked tickets are an absolute racket in North Carolina, and savvy cops have realized they don't care to enforce it. Basically what happens is a lower income person gets a traffic ticket for speeding or whatever, and the judge will give them up to 30 days to pay it. However, because the fines are generally $213 to $263, a lot of lower income people can't afford to pay the ticket. So once the time to pay expires, the DMV revokes their license. Then someone will get pulled over for having a revoked license. At this point, they still have the reason for the revocation outstanding. They have a new, more serious ticket, and they have to pay reinstatement fees with the DMV to get their license back, assuming they're able to clear up the reason for the revocation. Oh yeah, if you plead guilty to driving while license revoked, your license will be suspended automatically for a year on your first offense, or even longer if it's not the first. Generally, people will not come to me, defense attorney, until they're already charged with the driving while license revoked, because that's when they realize how screwed they are. The good news is I've talked to some officers about these driving while license revoked tickets who don't care about the offense. They just want to see the client get their license back, so they'll either tell the DA they don't want it prosecuted, or just get it set on a court date when the officer won't be there so I can get it dismissed. It's all about money. Total freaking racket. Story 7. I live in a community that is basically addicted to hunting. So most kids have their own rifle and car by 17. Our school obviously has a rule about not allowing guns on the property in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes people are hunting after school though and forget to drop the gun off at home first. My friend did this once. He was already a few minutes late for class, so he went to ask for a slip to return the gun. The gun was unloaded in his trunk and locked in a case like it was supposed to be. He went to the office to ask if he could be excused to return it home. It would take him maybe 15 minutes tops. Nope. The school freaking called the police. One of the town cops came, listened to the story, searched the vehicle and found the gun perfectly and safely packed away. He looked the superintendent dead in the eye and said he wasn't going to arrest a kid for trying to do the right thing. The superintendent later tried and failed to have the cop fired. Even me, a non-gun owner in Canada, realizes how stupid this is. Kid clearly had no bad intentions with the gun. It was just like, hey, can I go bring this back home like I'm supposed to, and then got the cops called on him? Like, come on. Who are you protecting right now? Story 8. When I was a police officer, I hated marijuana laws. I would just tell the person to dump it on the ground when I found it. I did the same when I would find underage kids with alcohol. Dump it out and be on your way. Aside from that, I pretty much never wrote tickets for equipment violations such as a headlight out, etc. I would just politely let the person know they needed to fix it. Lastly, I would rarely write tickets for expired registration, especially when it was clear the person was struggling financially. I couldn't sleep at night knowing I'd basically punished someone whose only crime was being poor. Story 9. There's a policy in the province that I work in that basically says if you're called to a domestic, you have to arrest and charge someone. So you basically have to pick who the main aggressor was and arrest/charge/tell them they can't go home. A lot of times there's no injuries or evidence that anything even happened, so it puts you in a difficult spot. Also, I dislike pulling people over and giving tickets. If I see something awful, I'd be compelled to give a warning. The tickets where I work are just too expensive for the average person. Story 10. Homelessness. We would get so many calls of transients in certain areas. Most are just laying in the sun on the grass, not bothering anyone. But all it takes is a phone call from a board commissioner or someone in power, and we would get a call to tell them to move. We all hated it. Seatbelt tickets. I'm sure this is not a popular one, but if you don't like wearing your seatbelt while driving, I couldn't care less. If you want a new face, that's on you. Marijuana. Smoke it all you want, just don't drive. OP, I also have to disagree with you on the seatbelt tickets one. Seatbelts are not just for the safety of the person in the seat. Primarily, yes. But a person flying out of a windshield can cause a whole whack of other problems. I think it does push it more into the territory of this can create problems or be bad for other people and therefore it should be enforced. I agree that if it only affected the person who is doing it, or not doing it in this case, sure, but I just don't think that's the case here. I do, however, greatly appreciate your views on homelessness, though. It's nice to know that even the cops that are moving them along, as it were, don't always love it. That's reassuring. Story 11. I disagree with anything cannabis related. Unless you're in possession of a ton of it and it's obvious they're selling it to who they're not supposed to. If you have personal use, I and the other good cops usually just confiscate it or make the person destroy it themselves in our presence. Also not a state law, but we have a $500 impound fee that we're forced to enforce on impound related to driving with a suspended or revoked license, and possession of cannabis. Generally, that means we're taking a vehicle from someone that can't afford to get their license back and holding their vehicle hostage while it accrues more daily fees. 9 times out of 10, these people are decent folk who are just trying to get their kids to school or go to work. There are only a few people in our department who like impounding vehicles under this ordinance, because the admin likes it. Everyone else sees it for what it is, a giant money grab. Story 12. My dad was a cop, MP specifically. He thought banning radar detectors was dumb. His reasoning was because you're trying to get people to slow down, and a speeding ticket was a result of people not slowing down. Ticketing for using a radar detector is just ticketing to give out tickets, as radar detectors make people slow down. Story 13. This question is a big reason why I'm getting out of law enforcement and moving to EMS. Marijuana is strictly enforced in my state, while alcohol is constantly abused and is the cause of the majority of domestic violence, assault, and DUIs. I used to love being a cop. I got into this with my entire goal being to help children. I was horrifically abused as a kid and wanted to be the white knight for kids, so they would never have to endure what I did. Due to poor policies and our society blacklisting law enforcement, it is impossible for us to do our jobs anymore. We are told to enforce drug laws, as they make the state the most money, while the attorney's office drops DV assault cases and ORs assaults as often as a toddler drops their utensils. I refuse to charge marijuana in personal use amounts. I will not write tickets for bullcrap traffic violations. I will stop and enforce more egregious offenses, obviously, but I just feel like we have lost our humanity in a lot of ways by trying to solve everything through the legal system. Jails don't fix drug problems. Cops shouldn't be focused on fighting what the state believes as crime. They should be helping people, saving lives. Persons and property crimes should be the focus of law enforcement, not petty crap like THC. Story 14. Former cop. I always disliked busting someone for possession of a small personal use amount of marijuana. I never saw anyone ruin their life with it, unlike alcohol. Bit of a mixed bag busting someone smuggling/dealing a large amount. On the one hand, I realized that in a state where marijuana is illegal, that's the only way to distribute it. On the other hand, it's not like I can take your word for it that you aren't selling to kids or that your product is pure. The answer to that is just to legalize and regulate. Story 15. One guy I work with left his PD after 19 years because he got sick of the justice system's handling of drug abusers/dealers. Basically, they'd get arrested and then they'd get bailed out for like $40. Then they'd take a plea deal, which would be like a $500 fine and a drug rehab class. When they didn't go to the class, which they almost never did, they would get a warrant on them and the cycle would start anew. Basically, the justice system doesn't care about drug use. Long ago, the people voted for someone who thought that jail would make a good rehab, and it doesn't. And these folks get stuck in an endless loop of fines and fees and police interaction, and nothing gets done. Oh, except the judge making their six-figure salary. It's all a game, and nobody's taking serious steps to curb the drug problem in the US. And the officers have to keep arresting the same people over and over again until those people either find their own way out of abuse or overdoses. Plus, drugs do crazy things, and the officers are put in constant danger for seemingly no reason. Story 16. Weed. The penalties are excessive. Trafficking also has a much higher penalty, especially if supplying to a minor. You would get teens who would try to argue with you and say how they were just giving some or selling some to their friends. You don't have to use this as evidence, though, and a quick reminder of their right to silence does the trick. Have literally told one or two to shut up, though, because they didn't understand. Self-defense laws. Had a bloke who'd defended himself, and rightly so, but his actions were right on the line for justified versus excessive, so we opted to let the courts decide. That unfortunately meant arresting him. He was eventually acquitted, and I'm glad for it. Tenancy disputes. Some tenants are crap and deserve to be evicted, but there are a lot of landlords who treat tenants badly by not fixing urgent repairs, misusing their entry powers, etc. But if a tenant stops paying all of their rent, then they can be rightfully evicted. Sometimes the tenants can become upset and were called in. We always made sure we transported the evicted tenant to a place of safety. We had one landlord who was notorious for misusing police for this kind of stuff. We eventually ended up fining him because he refused to repair a smoke alarm in a property. He had called us to evict the poor tenant and got a repair bill and a fine. Story 17. Domestics. In my state, the law says that we must arrest someone at a domestic, but people who live together are bound to argue. And so many times, jail and trial aren't only going to not make things better, they're going to exacerbate problems. So I do my best just to get everyone to calm down and separate it and talk our way out of legal proceedings. Story 18. In Belgium, we have discretionary authority. It means police officers can choose to not report some crimes. This doesn't apply to serious misdemeanors or felonies, as it's overruled by having to actually help people and being obligated to answer to civilians' legal requests. But if you think some laws related to parking, for instance, are stupid, you just never write a ticket. Story 19. Possession of weed. Too many people who mean no harm to anyone pay heavy fines and go to prison for possession of harmless drugs. Never had a bad encounter with anyone who is high, but people abusing alcohol, a legal drug, are so crappy to deal with, always. They're either aggressive or don't understand a word you say. Weed needs to be legalized. Country is Germany. I'm currently still studying, so technically not a full officer. Story 20. First is tinted windows, California. I can argue good reasons to have tinted windows all day long. I refuse to write a ticket for them unless you're being a jerk to me. Second, banging under 18. We all know what happens. Most of us probably did it. But if I find a couple of 17-year-olds fooling around, in my opinion, they're not doing anything worth ruining someone's life over. Oh, now, if it's a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old, that's a very different story. Damn, OP, you didn't need to come after me by saying most of us probably did it. Me feeling attacked aside, though, I'm surprised that California doesn't have Romeo and Juliet laws. I think most of Canada does, at least the province that I'm in does. And it makes a lot of sense, I think, in most cases. Just being like, you can't legally do this under 18 seems like a great way to make kids make mistakes. Because guess what? Telling kids they can't do something doesn't stop them from doing it ever. Story 21. So we aren't routinely armed. We carry pava, mace, as well as friction lock batons and cuffs, etc. And some officers carry a taser. When there's an incident involving firearms, which is very rare, or to varying degrees of weapons like knives, etc., then the control room would resource an ARV, Armed Response Vehicle, which is crewed by at least 2 armed officers who are obviously equipped to deal with the incident. Story 22. Not a cop, but ran a residence hall at a large public co-ed institution, and there was still a curfew for the opposite sex in 2009. Turned my freaking head every time. Also pushed for it to be ended on the grounds that it was discriminatory, since same-sex couples could feel free to stay at partners all the time, which of course was not the intent of their heteronormative policy. Told them it needed to either be no guests after 9 or all guests after 9. OP, you know there's a good chance that they could have said, "You're right, actually, no guests after 9. And then all the students hate you, right? Just saying, that could backfire so quickly. Story 23. Not a cop, but a good friend of mine is. He hates writing tickets. If he pulls someone over for a minor traffic violation, he will reduce it to a warning and just advise the driver of the rules and to be safe when they leave. At least if they're professional and understanding of the circumstances. Having said this, if the driver is immediately being a butt, they're getting the ticket. He's a stickler just on drugs. Amphetamine and H use around our parts is huge. Drunk driving too, obviously. He's arrested other cops for drunk driving that he's friends with because he doesn't believe in the double standard towards other cops. If he catches someone with weed, he'll just stomp it out unless it's some insane amount that would suggest sale. If it's something harder, ice, H, pills, etc., you're taking a ride. Yeah, why should a cop be exempt from a drunk driving ticket? Or fine, or charge, whatever it's called. That stuff is a serious deal. And hey, if I had to guess, I would say that the average cop probably doesn't drive any better than the average citizen while drunk. Story 24. My sister is in the police, and this is a story told to her when she first got in. There was a guy from the army that just came back from Afghanistan, and he found out that his wife was sleeping with another man. She started crying and told him the proof was there in the garbage bin. He got angry, and in a moment of hot-headedness, he held her up against the wall and punched his hand through the wall. When the guy realized what he had done, he went outside and sat on the curb and just started crying, because he realized he got really angry at his wife and could have harmed her. The police got called and he had to go to jail. The police officers felt bad about it, but it was the law. Years later, one of the police officers saw the guy again. It turned out he became homeless, and it all started because of that event. Story 25. My dad was a sheriff's deputy for 28 years, and always talked to me about the spirit of the law mattering more than the letter of the law. He believed in cutting people breaks whenever he could. Before weed was decriminalized here, if you had a small amount, like obviously for personal consumption, he would just confiscate it and send you on your way, provided you didn't have some outstanding warrant he couldn't ignore. He never believed that small stuff should determine the rest of your life, and felt like a victimless crime deserves a chance to correct itself. Story 26. I would hope some doctor or police from El Salvador would be uncomfortable to jail a woman for suspicion of abortion. But alas, too many poor women, 16, are in jail just on suspicion. Weirdly, only really poor women and illiterate women are convicted under this law. It's almost as if every woman that has money can get abortions in other countries or places where they can do it without the police crapping on them. Story 27. I'm just going to add this from the opposite side of the spectrum. I am a former H addict. Got arrested with an ex of mine. She had 2 bags of H on her worth about $8. She dropped them in my car because she had a warrant for her arrest, hoping they would take her and let me go. Unluckily, they found them. She told the 2 cops at the scene that they were hers and the bags had nothing to do with me. Basically said she knew she had a warrant and didn't want the extra charge, but would take it now because it was her fault. Then the supervisor proceeded to tell the officers to charge both of us. Goes to court with report saying the drugs aren't mine, and co-defendant has taken responsibility for the drugs. Literally 100% irrelevant, apparently. So I get charged with a felony narcotics charge. 6 months in jail, 2 months rehab, sober house, groups at a clinic, and 2-year probation. Less than a year later, my state changes small amounts of H to a misdemeanor. For 6 years, I've been denied 30-plus jobs based on this felony conviction, which is now a misdemeanor for drugs that weren't even mine because a sergeant was literally like, "Nah, screw 'em." Yeah, screw the police, by the way. 6 years sober to keep the same crappy job. It has literally ruined my life. I was 22 at the time, and I'm almost 30 now. Literally two completely different people. My whole future trashed over $8 worth of drugs. And yes, the sergeant actually said, "Nah, screw 'em." Edit. I was already off drugs at this point. I was just giving my ex a ride because, well, you know how exes work. Story 29. Suddenly everyone is a cop. I'm no cop, but I had an encounter with one. The cop came to my store as he was instructed to do. He was going door to door to fine all the businesses for having advertising on their windows. So some lady in politics passed a law that all businesses displaying advertising on their windows are fined for having any type of sticker. The fine was €500 per window for not registering the sticker and a fee of €50 per square meter every year. He came in and, as anyone in my position would be, I got angry. They passed a law, didn't tell anyone about it, and went around collecting fines. He was terribly shy. You could see him mumbling, nodding, and getting red. And he apologized too. "I'm really sorry, but I have to do this." Then he added to it that only small businesses are targeted. He had to fine his own mother too, who is a florist. After he was done measuring the stickers, he calculated a €7,500 fine in total. I told him, I'm not going to pay a cent of that. That's about 6 months' wage for a small business like ours. He said, "I hate the people enforcing stupid laws on small people. The big companies are free to do whatever they want. You know what? Close the shutters and stick a note to it saying closed. I'll take a picture of that and say that you were closed. Then you have a month to register the stickers. The fee is only $1,200 per year." I still didn't agree, but the truth is, next time they might send a not-so-nice officer. And here, if you don't pay, you lose your business. They will close it ASAP. So yeah, that's my story with the cop who didn't want to fine me because of a stupid law. Story 30. Pot, MIP, PFMA, in some circumstances. Pot, obvious reasons. MIP, feel like a hypocrite since I drank in high school and college. PFMA, it's a mandatory arrest, and sometimes it really is just a pushing match where neither party are ever in danger. But since it's a mandatory arrest, someone has to go. So I have to pick the bigger one, usually male, since it's not reasonable for him to be more afraid than her about being pushed. I'm usually able to justify no arrests, but once in a blue moon I'm told someone has to go, which is unfortunate, and I hate being a part of it. I looked it up because I wasn't sure. MIP is minor in possession, and PFMA is partner or family member assault. Story 31. In Texas, there are 2 versions of assault. A Class C misdemeanor, which is literally just a fine, and Class A, which is punishable by jail and a fine. When I worked as a school resource officer, parents wanted to always file charges for a Class C assault, which is technically unwanted touching that didn't equal any injury. Kids are kids, and they're always touching or hitting each other, and if one of them took it too far, here come the parents wanting blood. The worst case I had was a girl who bit the inside of her boyfriend's lip when they were making out. Mom had a crap fit, and since blood was drawn and technically was an injury, I had to arrest a 14-year-old for Class A assault. After that case, I quit the force. There were other factors, but that was one that broke the camel's back. Story 32. I'm technically not a police officer, but I hope you enjoyed this anyway. Correctional officer here. There are a few rules in place at my prison that I disagree with. The biggest rule I disagree with has to do with inmates beating off in their bunks. Technically, if we catch them on a prison date, we're supposed to put them in cuffs and escort them to solitary, but I don't always do that. Beyond the fact I don't want some nasty, sweaty guy nutting on me, I also don't see a big reason to lock somebody up for enjoying themselves on their own time, provided they aren't irritating anybody else. If they're in their bed and not being loud or obnoxious or not beating off to a CO, I usually just tell them to stop. If they're in the day room or they're staring at a CO while they do it, I'll take them to solitary because they're usually doing it to make somebody uncomfortable, or to see what they can get away with. It's worse with female staff, but it happens to male staff as well. Unfortunately, I had to walk an inmate to solitary the other day for this reason. I guess my butt just looks too good in my pants or something. Story 33. I'm an ex-police dispatcher, so not a cop, but close enough. Anyway, this was right after my department first got body cams. It was our city's high school's homecoming night, so needless to say, there were a lot of after parties around town. Well, this one nosy Nelly calls up and says, "There are a bunch of underage kids out in my neighbor's back porch drinking and smoking." No complaints about noise or anything, just them being underaged. And with that on a recorded line, it means I can't tell her to screw off and mind her own business. I have to send someone to check. So my guys get there, and as my buddy relayed to me later, there were 8 kids with a single six-pack between them. No sign of intoxication/further drinking, and no evidence whatsoever of any smoking going on. We have to run them all out for any record, and they're all clean. All honors students. They were polite and respectful. It's really rare for my buddy to get this upset over things, but he was really angry that because it was recorded on body cam, he had to write each of these kids a summons to court and call all their parents to come get them. Before, he would have just had them dump whatever was in the bottles down the sink and say, hey, knock it off. It's not like they were throwing a rager and chugging from a bottle of vodka, just a quiet little gathering doing a little bit of celebrating, and now he has to go and pee in their cornflakes because of a body camera. Story 34. I'm not police, but I'm a jail sergeant. I have a disdain for drug possession as a crime, as well as the probationary system as a whole. The criminal justice system in America is screwed, and has some inherent biases that upset me every day. Want to see white and or rich privilege? Oh, look no further than sentencing records. Hey, make no mistake, I'm no liberal, but the system that employs me is very broken and needs reform. I do my best to help by treating everyone I come into contact with like I would like to be treated, with respect and dignity, and I accept no less from my subordinates. Hey, OP, I may not fully agree with you on everything, but the fact that you hold yourself to a respectful standard and hold your subordinates to that same standard, that gets a tip of the hat from me. Well done, man. Story 35. A lot of people have already mentioned the marijuana for personal use thing, and I agree with that. The thing I absolutely hate is moving violations. They can really affect a person in the long run. The ticket itself is very expensive, plus the traffic school, plus the massive insurance price increase. I hate putting people through that. Unless the driver is being a butt, then I don't care. It's even worse if the person has a commercial driver's license. It can get revoked and you can cost someone their job. And my other thing is, I don't like giving people tickets for something I'm also at fault in, like tinted windows or no front license plate, things like that. I find it very hypocritical to enforce a rule I break every day. Story 36. Not a cop, my cousin is. He hates enforcing speeding laws. For most people who speed, it's maybe going 20 to 50% over the limit down a straight highway with little traffic around, hurting nobody and not causing any danger to anyone. In most cases, he'll let people off with a warning. He says maybe 1 out of 25 of the people he pulls over for speeding are actually dangerous. Examples like twice the limit in a residential area, zippering traffic, drag racing, etc. Okay, maybe this is just me, but 50% over the limit, even down a straight highway, seems a bit egregious. 20%? Sure, whatever. 50%? Like if we're talking an 80s, someone going 120? That's simply gotta be unsafe, right? I'm no traffic expert though, so maybe I'm wrong. Story 37. Seatbelt tickets and BS warrants. Had one warrant I picked someone up on. Once I run them and verify the warrant, if I let them go, I could be held in contempt of court. It was for picking up $20 off the casino floor. They identified her via Players Club card and camera system. Tribal police issued a county warrant for her for larceny, so it went through our county court system and not tribal. Story 38. In my department, it is standard procedure to arrest both parties in an assault if both parties exhibit physical trauma from the fight. On one occasion, I was on a call in which a woman was trying to leave an abusive ex. She said when she tried to leave, he shoved her down the stairs of his front porch and grabbed her hair to try and smash her face into the concrete. She managed to fight him off and drive away to her friend's house. She had clumps of hair in the back seat of her car, skin peeled from where her forearms hit the concrete, and could barely talk before breaking down. She had no priors for any violent offenses. He had been through our jail on a handful of domestic assault charges, so seemed pretty straightforward. When we showed up to his place to hook him up, he took off into the next county. He finally showed up with a gigantic black eye, claiming that she started it by punching him. Looked like a freaking horse kicked him in the eye. I figured he had called up a friend and had one lay a solid punch on him to make it appear as if he was acting in self-defense. My superior showed up on the scene and had me arrest the woman. When I asked about the 2-hour break between the call and him showing up, she said she didn't give a crap and told me to hook them both up and get the affidavits done before the end of shift. And that's when I lost faith in what I was doing as an officer. I never saw that woman again. Hopefully she found someone better. Oh, he's still around. He likes to brag to people about how he's been to prison like it's a badge of honor. Wow, buddy, you've been to prison on a DV charge. You're so tough. You're so cool. You beat up someone physically weaker than you who should trust you. You're a loser, man. And also, whoever that friend was who helped him out is also a loser. Story 39. Cool cops that don't sweat traffic but still pull you over do a greater service than they know. They slow you down and make you very appreciative with an immediate reality check. I've had police ticket me in situations where others wouldn't because I was active duty and should have known better. I had more money then and could afford speeding tickets. Now, as a disabled young war vet, it makes me crack a tear when an officer recognizes game and lets a young, struggling veteran go about his already wild civilian transition. Keeps us feeling like we're still on the side that matters most. So all the cops that break bread with us, thank you. That $50 to $150 ticket break can be the difference some months between sweating it or not, cause the VA is that second left shoe that never fits. Respect. Story 40. When I was a contractor with a TS clearance working for a 3-letter agency, I quit after 6+ years because they moved me from supporting the computer forensics lab to assisting cyber division folks on how to catch bad guys. It was 2014, and one of these dudes who entraps people on the dark web asked me what Bitcoin was. He was going for drug dealers and people he could convince to perform acts of terror. They usually promise a desperate man hundreds of thousands of dollars to fire an RPG or plant a bomb in a major building, and when they show up to actually do it, the agents swarm them, and the person ends up going to prison for a very long time. Most of these people realized they would end up in prison but were so desperate for the money to take care of their families they didn't care. They ended up with prison and no money. And there are rarely actual plots foiled by the feds that the feds didn't set up and plan themselves. An exception was the Times Square bomber in the early 2010s. Dude had an SUV full of explosives and was stopped before it could go off. The final straw was when they tried to force Apple to bust their iPhone encryption on the California terrorist couple. Turns out that they paid a third party to bust it, but the intent was already there. There's no way the government should force any private company to break their own security features. Story 41. Not a cop, but I work overnight security for a major theme park. One of our rules was that no one was allowed to sleep in their cars on property, and if they were caught, we were supposed to do a report and turn them into their leaders. Sorry, not sorry, but some of these people just got off a 16-hour shift, and then they have a 2-hour drive home only to turn around and do it again the next day. So hey, if they want to take a nap in a safe parking lot with lights and security, I'm gonna let them. I have never and will never tell an exhausted person that they have to drive, and that they might lose their job because they're taking up a parking space. Story 42. It's easy in this age to vilify cops as power-hungry narcissists. I thank this post for reaffirming my belief that although I have a passionate hatred for those that abuse power, most law enforcement officers are just people who are doing their job to provide for their families. It's like that customer service rep that can't help you with your problem because of company policy, even though, as a human, they would rather you walk away happy and satisfied, but they can't forego that policy because their jobs would be in jeopardy. Story 43. I remember a cop in my town very well for being feared by the kids because he was relentless on kids drinking, smoking, and having your bicycle in order. Like, if he caught you with a defective light, you had to fix it in a day and show up at the station. Once I managed to fall off my bike and hurt myself pretty bad. He was there, and he checked on me, and he insisted on driving me home or to a doctor. He threw my bike into his trunk, and off we went. A scary guy, but an earnest and fair-playing cop. Story 44. You can thank the Catholics in Minnesota for passing a law about taking your own life that basically gives any prosecutor carte blanche authority to charge anybody for supporting someone taking their own life in any way. And as you can probably guess, this snags a lot of people who simply helped their dying wife, father, mother, etc. avoid the pain for the last moments of their life, who were going to clearly die soon anyway. Here's a read of the statute. It's kind of crazy. Whoever intentionally advises, encourages, or assists another in taking the other's own life may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 15 years, or to payment of a fine of not more than $30,000, or both. And 2. Aiding attempts on one's own life. Whoever intentionally advises, encourages, or assists another who attempts but fails to take the other's own life may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 7 years, or to payment of a fine of not more than $14,000, or both. And yes, they do use it against innocent people. Another guy in Minnesota was arrested for chatting with people over the internet about taking their own lives, and was charged in Minnesota for the death of someone in Britain, for allegedly talking to them not in person but virtually. I'm a bit mixed on the second, but this happens quite a bit like the first example. And jailing someone for being a sociopath who encourages someone to take their own life and does nothing more is starting to sound like thought crimes to me. I don't know if I agree with OP's closing statement here. Encouraging someone who is emotionally vulnerable to take their own life is nowhere near a thought crime. Like, something active is being done. Thoughts are being put in this other person's brain that their ideas of taking their own life are correct. So, yeah, I can't be on board with that. Story 45. Mandatory arrest violations. For example, many police agencies have a mandatory arrest of the primary aggressor in all incidents of domestic violence. This is because in previous times, cops didn't do crap when they responded to a family dispute where the husband or boyfriend smacked the woman half of the relationship, even though there were indications an assault had occurred. In many incidents, the male half got even angrier and beat the female half worse because the cops had been called. With mandatory arrest, now when the cops show up and there is any indication that an assault had occurred, they are obligated to arrest the primary aggressor, the one who started hitting first if both parties went to blows, or the one who did the hitting if the other half didn't fight back. It seems like a good rule, but sometimes one party is mad at the other and calls the cops, saying they've been beaten up when in fact they hadn't, but wanted the other person to go to jail or the cops to respond quicker. The cops arrive and the same caller sticks to their story although the other half denies it. There's no way to disprove that it occurred, so they take the suspect into custody. Yeah, it sucks. But if it's the police agency's policy, the cops won't violate it for fear of violating said policy and risking getting in trouble. Story 46. I was a deputy sheriff in a county of the state of Georgia, 2002 to 2007. My biggest personal ethical conflict arose with not so much a law itself, but how areas were enforced. An example, and honestly why I left it, was how specific neighborhoods were more or less segregated, and our county was very harsh on the black or brown communities as opposed to white communities, especially in cases of domestic violence. I remember a rather influential individual in the county with a habit. I say habit because at the time I was there, he had over 7 issues, read as beating his wife, that because of his influence, particularly over our specific department, we would get a call and the actual sheriff would respond. Our job was to calm down the wife and talk her out of pressing charges. I found this incredibly unethical because, had they been black, the man would be arrested and carted off, though the wife would give a statement and be checked out by EMS. That ethical problem started to turn my stomach with law enforcement in general. That sheriff probably would wear his white hood if the uniform wasn't brown. I learned a lot, but I hate that my assumptions about the agency were so off. Okay, I'm sorry, but the line, that sheriff probably would wear his white hood if the uniform wasn't brown, goes insanely hard. You get that piece of garbage, OP, hell yeah. Story 47. Honestly, I'm curious if any cop actually enforces that dumb New York law not allowing you to have those sports team-based plate frames, or any frame for that matter, all because it hides the Empire State part of it, even though there's a big ol' New York at the top clearly visible, was the dumbest thing my dad and I saw in Newsday as a kid. Story 48. Adding to the marijuana stuff. I was about 16 with 4 friends on the beach, drinking and smoking pot at around 2 a.m., chatting and so on. Then suddenly, cops beside us. None of us noticed them approaching. 2 of them. They asked if we were keeping out of trouble, and we said yes. Did our parents know where we were? Yes. Then one of them sniffs real hard, and we're thinking we're screwed. The 2 cops looked at each other and then back to us and said, "Make sure you take your trash with you when you go. Don't make us come looking for you all at school." Then disappeared into the darkness, and about 5 minutes later, we're all chatting about how those ninja cops scared the crap out of us. And oh yeah, we made sure to collect our trash when we left. To be fair, my town had a bunch of weed dealers once back in the 80s and 90s. There was a crackdown mid-90s, and surprise, everyone just moved on to coke and bonsai, which made violence in the town center skyrocket. So there's contextual reasons beyond, I don't care, that these cops would turn a blind eye to marijuana users in the early 2000s when this occurred. Sober for years now, in any case. Story 49. Speeding citations. Don't get me wrong. If I sit in the same spot every day and I catch you going 15 over, you deserve it. I exercise my discretion every time when it comes to labor workers. Coming home from a 12 or 16-hour shift at a construction/steel mill/some sort of labor job, congrats. Here is your warning for going 20 over. I mostly feel uncomfortable because I don't really like writing citations, but admin wants them, otherwise you'll hear it. I also speed myself sometimes, so that makes me feel guilty, but whatevs, I guess. Story 50. Officer discretion. Warnings were still me doing my job, but not causing someone hardship for no reason. Anything that caused harm to any person or property would usually get the usual treatment, though. Unfortunately, with body cams and everyone wanting to record everything, officer discretion is pretty limited. And now sometimes my hands are tied, and I have to hassle a person simply because the all-seeing eye is watching. Story 51. I don't disagree with any laws per se, but I recognize that often, for certain misdemeanors, the better sanction isn't arrest or a fine, but rather a talk with the person, and trying to make them see what they've done from an outside perspective. And while I don't disagree with any of the laws, since they're often implemented by people with a lot more expertise than me, I sometimes feel that some laws need a revision based off of contemporary research. but I don't feel any joy from enforcing most laws, unless someone knowingly and willingly caused another person danger or harm. Story 52. Traffic tickets. I would pull people over, give a verbal warning about whatever dumb or unsafe thing they did, check for warrants, and let them go. I got funny looks for the blank spot in my work card where the tickets were supposed to go, but since it's illegal to officially or unofficially have a quota system, it could never be used against me in my job eval. Story 53. A friend of mine had an incident where a guy called the station and demanded their help retrieving his kids from his ex-wife. Domestic issue, and the paperwork was in place to give the guy his kids on this certain weekend. However, he was abusive right from the start with my buddy, and sounded severely intoxicated on the phone. My friend has a bad feeling. There was a back and forth to determine his state of mind, and due diligence showed that this complainant had multiple domestic charges, and told him he was not going to assist. Apparently the guy said to my friend he had better freaking help, or the blood will be on your hands. That sealed it. My friend hung up, called the ex-wife, and told her to get to a safe place with the kids now. Ex-husband was located in his truck in a farmer's field, dead from a self-inflicted gun wound about 2 days later. My friend wondered if he had any intention of harming the children on that night. Story 54. Refusal to provide breath sample. I've actually had to arrest people who have medical conditions and can't blow into a breathalyzer due to the way the law is written, as there are no exceptions. Leave it to the good old Canadian government to screw that one up. One time I knew someone at a ride checkpoint wouldn't be able to blow into a breathalyzer due to him having an oxygen tank and mask. I had to arrest him. Though no one is usually charged in that scenario, it still makes you feel uncomfortable when you enforce it at times. And traffic laws on minors/young drivers. Technically, you're supposed to give out the maximum punishment for a traffic offense when it's a novice driver who committed the offense. I usually just give them a verbal or written and tell them to not do anything like it again. I'm kind of confused here, because roadside breathalyzers aren't admissible in court as far as I know, even in Canada. And if that's the case, why would not blowing into one be an arrestable offense? Lack of cooperation or something like that? I don't know. Seems weird to me. Story 55. I gotta say, I don't like many police, but you guys in this thread seem very chill. I'm glad to see this number of cops that feel this way. Now, when I say I don't much like police, it's not that I think none of you get into it for the right reasons or that I think you're bad people, but as a civilian, I've had very mixed experiences. And whenever I have to deal with the police, I think, crap. It's either a good officer trying to do their job, or a jerk with a lot of power over me who the judges would believe over me in a heartbeat. Story 56. There was a call for domestic abuse my partner and I responded to. Get to the house and the girl is clearly beaten by her drunk husband. We haul him to the squad car and I ask her if she wants to press charges. She says no. It was just an injury from a fall or whatever. Couple weeks later, same call. Except this time I don't take him down to the station. I take him way out of town, pull him out of the car, get him on his knees and put my gun in his mouth. He's peed himself crying about how he won't do it again, yada yada. So I stand there holding my service pistol for what felt like 10 minutes before I decide to pack him back in the squad car and leave. Well, a week later I get the same call, except this time her head's been bashed in. Moral of the story, never use a half measure when you should have used a full measure. Now, assuming this one's real, I don't know how I feel about it. In a lot of ways, it seems not great, but there's a small part of me that gets it. You have absolutely no power with the law if she doesn't want to press charges. And if it keeps happening, there is still nothing you can do. And you just have to watch this person get battered over and over again by an abusive piece of garbage. But on the other hand, being the judge, jury, and executioner of something like this is also dangerous for other reasons, but I don't know, OP. If you did it, I don't know if I think it's right or not, but I don't know if I would have been able to blame you. Story 57. Illegal street crossing. Of course, I have the option to give the person a warning instead of a fine, and I do most of the time. The only time I actually fine a person for this is when the person doesn't pay attention to traffic and forces a driver to stop, risking their health or the driver's liberty. But if there's a 3-meter wide lane and the traffic is blocked because of a traffic light, yeah, I don't see the problem in crossing the street. Story 58. Any kind of breach of AVO with a no-contact condition when the victim has deliberately made contact and organized to see defendant. It usually ends with them getting into another argument which causes the victim to call the police and bang, breach of AVO, bail refused. I feel like it should be an offense for the victim to try to facilitate a meetup and knowingly contravene the orders on their AVO. After all, it is put in place because the victim has fears for their safety. Asking the defendant to come visit you shows you have no fears. It's such a shame, really, that they're used as a tool to stand over someone and not for protection. Yeah, this sounds like DIY entrapment. I also agree, this is kind of messed up. I never even thought of this, but OP, you're kind of spittin'. Story 59. Long story short, I had an old Jeep that I could start the car and take the keys out of the ignition and the car would stay running. But without the keys in the ignition, the car wouldn't go into drive. If I put the vehicle into drive and pull the keys out, I can put it in park, but I couldn't put it back into drive. Leaving the bar too drunk to drive before Uber and all that crap, I started my car, got out, put the keys in the wheel, and fell asleep. Woke up to an officer knocking on my window. After a little discussion and describing how the ignition lock cylinder worked, he let me call a friend to come pick me up. No ticket or anything. We both kind of laughed at how I got around all the crap. That officer's still on the force, and every once in a while I see him, and we both still laugh about it. Story 60. Not an officer, but my buddy sitting with me is. In our city, homelessness is a big problem, and people call the police often in the downtown area to remove them, sometimes making false reports. There is a no camping ordinance in which they're supposed to cite people and make them move along. Our shelters are full. These people have nowhere to go. He hates it. It makes him feel like a bully. Story 61. Escort work. How is someone going to tell another person that they can't give someone money in exchange for banging? The amount of resources dedicated to enforcing these laws is insane when you consider the amount of violent crime that officers could instead be reducing or preventing. Even non-violent crimes like theft from vehicles or vandalism. I'm sure if you asked citizens in most communities, they would tell you that they would much rather have the police looking for people who break into their vehicles and spray paint the walls around their homes than conducting undercover stings on adults who have made the choice to bang in exchange for money. Story 62. We have a policy to write a citation when there's an accident involving two parties, where usually someone's at fault. I hate those, along with most traffic tickets and petty amounts of marijuana possession tickets. I found a workaround in our reporting system. It requires you to write a citation serial number. Luckily, our written warning tickets are serialized. Discretion and all, sometimes crap really ain't their fault. Or I'm not ruining someone's day if they're the ones that ended up at the hospital all screwed up. Oh, by the way, you failed to yield. Story 63. We have a no drunk in public rule in Belgium. If you're drunk in public, officers can take you away. I live in a very big student town. The town is basically just the campus. Vast majority of inhabitants are students. Also, you obviously can't pee in the street. We drink a lot in Belgium, especially students. In this city, there are public parties every night of the week. I never got in trouble for being drunk or peeing in the street. Never heard of anyone who did either. It is also a no-car city. All of the center of town, all around the auditoriums, and most of the peripheral area around it have no roads for cars, so I suppose it isn't as dangerous as normal cities. Story 64. I live in a student town here in South Africa, and there used to be a trend just before I went to university here, say prior 2014, where police officers would pick up drunk students, usually white students due to a confusing to explain racial system here, nothing institutionalized though, and dropping them off in the American equivalent of a ghetto or a very low income / homeless area, and then leave them to their devices. This was a drunk and disorderly discipline the police took upon themselves to implement, which resulted in a lot of muggings and often aggravated assault. It has stopped somewhat, but it still disgusts me that they considered this okay, and refused to help them when they tried to lay cases against the police or the parties involved. Story 65. I don't know if law graduate counts, but this one personally made me rethink my whole interest in legal work, because what's the point? In Australia, we have a welfare system called Centrelink, which is notoriously unorganized, as well as difficult to contact. Basically just an entire mess. The only way to contact them is to sit on hold for literally 1 to 2 hours, or try to use their online platform, which is A, down half the time, or B, doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. Now, here's the problem. If you've been receiving payment for a while, Centrelink might review your payments against your income to see if what you told them you were earning was true, and you are entitled to welfare payments. If there's any discrepancy for any reason at all, you will owe a debt to them. Such a discrepancy can happen for a load of innocent reasons, most of them Centrelink's fault. But if the debt is over $10,000, it will immediately be referred to the Department of Public Prosecutions for investigation. The DPP is the Federal Organization for Criminal Activity. Their other listed investigations include drug rings, terrorism, war crimes, and the $10,000 debt owed by a poor person to the government. Anywho, regardless of whether the debt was Centrelink's fault or not, if you have a $10,000 plus a debt, you're now going to have to front up to a criminal court. The majority of cases referred to the DPP end up in court. While you're trying to pay legal fees, you'll also have to start paying back the debt immediately, even before the court decides whether it's right or wrong. Now, in some cases, it's obvious the person has done the wrong thing and undeclared their income or used a false ID or something to receive more money. But in a lot of cases, you get crap like, "Oh, Mabel is senile," and lets her kids handle her pension payments. Unbeknownst to her kids, she receives money from invested shares over the years. Her kids don't know how to report this income. Old retired senile Mabel has a $40,000 debt. The court decides that since she has $60,000 in her superannuation, she has enough to pay the debt back. The court also imposes 12 months jail time. This is a true example. Last year, 99% of Centrelink debt cases were successfully prosecuted in Australian criminal courts, owing in large fact to laws that have been rewritten to the point of nearly entirely obliterating court procedure. For example, while the cases are heard in the criminal court, which usually requires a higher proof beyond all reasonable doubt for conviction, legislation has been introduced to make the required evidence the easier civil court, balance of probabilities, while also maintaining the extreme punishments of the criminal court. On top of that, specific legislation regarding Centrelink debts also means that the majority of evidence that might prove Centrelink is in the wrong is actually inadmissible. So essentially you have a defendant, likely unable to afford legal representation, told they have a debt, perhaps for a very innocent reason, but none of their evidence will be accepted by the court. Meanwhile, Centrelink's team of Top Gun federal lawyers only has to prove there's an amount owing and bam, jail time. Last year, 99% of prosecutions were successful. Most women in women's prisons are currently in there not for violent crime, but over Centrelink debts. The people most likely to be convicted of Centrelink fraud are not young men, but actually young women primarily from low socioeconomic backgrounds, unlike every other crime. While there is a little bit of uproar about the robo-debt situation, I don't think it's quite enough for the absolute injustice Centrelink is really inflicting on people. I suppose because there's an attitude in Australia that those on welfare are dole bludgers, and if you have a debt yourself, you deserve to be prosecuted for it. But the absolute mess it has made of the Australian court system, which should be entirely separate to the legislative system, has made me lose my faith in the law. This is actually the one time where the court should use the separation of powers to pull back the legislature. But nah, it just sits there and lets the government eat away at the foundations of court procedures while literally thousands of probably innocent and definitely helpless Australians get thrown in the locker for taking some extra food money out of the fat cat's purse. Harkens back to the old days where you got jailed for stealing a loaf of bread, to be honest. Story 66. Not a cop, but the community service officers are way too hyped on a power trip around here. You drop something even unintentionally, they freaking swoop in to fine you for littering. I remember one story my friend told me they worked for them. One of their colleagues tried to fine a guy for littering for dropping a tissue. Oh, by the way, the guy was in the middle of a freaking heart attack. Give you a hint. If you have these jerks in your town or city, 95% of them are jerks who would fine their own grandmother for the laughs. Fining someone while they have a heart attack for littering because they dropped something? Like, are you just really stupid or do you not have a soul? It has to be one of the two. Story 67. Not a cop here. I can think of laws cops don't like enforcing. Drug laws are one example. If you pick up someone for smoking a joint, they usually get released before the paperwork is finished. In the past, cross-dressing was one. There were laws illegalizing public cross-dressing and more than 3 gay people hanging out. The gay riots and what some trans folk did pretty much put an end to those. For instance, trans people would impersonate attorneys to get their friends out of jail on bail. Or take the drag queen who sparked a riot by slinging hot coffee at the officer trying to arrest him for cross-dressing. Then there are laws that cops agree with but don't want to enforce. Domestic violence is one of those. You don't know how bad it is until you get there, and things are not always what they seem. Like the woman calling the law on an abusive spouse who then attacks the cops when they take him to jail. So while they're cuffing the man, the woman bashes the arresting officer over the head with a bottle. Taking someone's life out of honor used to be a thing in America. If a man murdered his wife for cheating or mouthing off at him, or a man called another man an SOB and that man took his life, they usually didn't do much time. Story 68. Not a police officer, but I'm in the US Coast Guard. Still mostly law enforcement. Some of the hardest crap I've done is migrant interdiction. When doing this mission, typically you find groups of migrants of anywhere from 20 to 40 people stuck on a boat, if you can even call it that should not be carrying more than 10. Most of the time, these migrant interdiction missions actually just turn into us rescuing their rafts before they sink, or they all die of dehydration. To take these people that are in such bad shape and to take them to the nearest port to get processed and sent back hurts my soul every time. Performing this mission makes everyone on the ship uneasy. Regardless of how you feel about migration and border enforcement, it's not a fun job. Story 69. Not a cop, but a security guard. I was working in college apartments. My job was to write down license plates of vehicles that enter or exit after 11 p.m. They wanted to punish students for not getting their rest. I would report things like vehicle was too far to read a plate in motion, dim license plate light, or report only official plates, like admin visiting office, someone visiting, they had a visitor lot, or police patrol. Their plate and cruiser number are the same, and cruiser number is painted on the side or bumper too. Also, in another location, I was told to report on when residents of a neighborhood are leaving in the morning. I would find something more important to do, like make reports on broken staff, and safety issues, like broken concrete or low wires that never got fixed, but reported on a nightly basis. Story 71. NYC here, Queens. Got popped right outside my apartment building by 2 undercover narcs. Was honest with them right off the bat. Told them what I had on me. Had pulled up quickly to run inside to grab my weed/bowl/lighter before heading back out to go play trivia at a local bar. I mean, the crap was in my pocket, there was nothing I could do. Not only did they not charge me with anything, they gave me said weed, bowl, lighter back and told me to enjoy. Apparently someone in my building had died from an H overdose and they were looking into that. They were watching the building and my quick in and out had made them suspicious. One of the perks of being white, to be honest. 100% guaranteed I would have ended up at Rikers had I been black or Hispanic. Screwed up. Story 72. In Kenya, you can pretty much get away with anything if you have cash on you for misdemeanors, or cash in the bank for larger offenses, but that also depends on the moral standards of the arresting officer. This basically means you can drive while smoking weed or drinking. Of course, don't overdo it, but just have $50 to $100 in cash on standby. I currently live in Southern California and I wouldn't dare break any laws. I follow them all to the letter. I'm not about to give anyone a reason to stop me, and if they do, my GoPro and phones are recording ready to sue. And that's the secret to zero tickets. If you want to live in a laissez-faire type democracy, go to Kenya or Nigeria. Do whatever the hell you want. Story 73. Not an officer, but an experience I was a part of. The town I lived in at the time is crooked as hell. Cops will smoke pot on the porch with a buddy of theirs and then go back to work. My now ex-husband and I went to the courthouse to get his license renewed, and he had on pants that had straps and chains, trip pants. In one of the pockets he had a glass pipe he forgot he put in there. As we went through the metal detector, the rings and such set it off, so they checked his pockets and wanded him. They found the very obviously used pipe in his pocket. The deputy had already been a jerk to him about his chosen attire, metal band t-shirt and the pants, saying he was a disgusting person and shouldn't be allowed in public. But he confiscated the pipe and said get what needed to be done taken care of and told me to get that trash out of the building. Pretty sure that deputy probably smoked whatever resin was left in it. Well, that was the last story we have for today, and I don't really understand what it had to do with the prompt, to be honest. It's a shame to end on that one. So many of the other stories were just cops being humans, which was nice. A refreshing change of pace from what you hear in media all the time now. But then there's this one, so okay, I guess. There were a lot of repeat situations in here, and I find that interesting. Seems like there are some, well, not universal, but very popular laws that a lot of cops are like, why do we have these? Or that they just straight up feel uncomfortable enforcing. Makes you wonder how those laws stay in place, huh? Anyway, for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.